LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the February 9th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing here. Tonight I have the 13 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which would be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. And of course, I have political comedy from last night's Saturday Night Live Cold Open, parodying the ABC New Hampshire debate that was earlier this week, including Larry David playing Bernie Sanders. And of course, my topic for the week is who can beat Trump, including actual clips of Bernie Sanders, Pete Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and Joe Biden from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I'll also briefly discuss big news stories that were earlier in the week and seemed to disappear by the time they got to the Sunday shows. Not completely, but almost completely. The Trump State of the Union address, the Senate voting 52-48 to acquit Trump on abuse of power, and 53-47 on obstruction of Congress in the Senate impeachment trial, the first trial in American history without witnesses, the first senator in American history, Mitt Romney, to vote to convict and remove a president of his own party. And then, of course, Trump's subsequent tantrums. I will discuss that briefly, especially when I get to the Lindsey Graham clip at the end. You can follow along my clip list down in the video description. I've put a link to my clip list, including clip 13, which is Lindsey Graham. You can try to understand my somewhat cryptic notes that I use to figure out what I'm going to say about the next clip or what's in the next clip. But first, as I promised, I'm going to start with the cold open from Saturday Night Live last night, where they parodied the New Hampshire debate on ABC earlier this week. And I'm going to show you the Larry David as Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg played by Colin Jost. I think they actually nailed something that is a problem for Pete Buttigieg, not so much for Bernie Sanders, and I will discuss that a little more. And by the way, as usual, the source of all my clips down in the video description, including Saturday Night Live, has almost all of the segments, maybe even all of the segments, available free on their YouTube channel. That's at a link down in the video description. And of course, the entire Saturday Night Live episode is available on the NBC website at a link down in the video description. But here is about a minute, I think it was about 9 minutes, the cold open. This is Larry David is Bernie Sanders, then Colin Jost is Pete Buttigieg. I'll talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Okay. I don't know how or why it happened, but I am king of an army of internet trolls called Bernie Bros. Could I stop them in their tracks? Of course. Should I? Yes. Will I? Hillary Clinton says nobody likes me. Let me ask you this. Then how come I'm the most popular guy on 4chan?
Mayor Pete. Look, I know corruption is a problem in this country. I know big business controls too much of Washington. I know Democrats don't want another candidate with massive corporate donors. And I know that I sound like a bot that has studied human behavior by watching 100 hours of Obama speeches. So let's get white Obama trending, and please, not ironically. Thank you.
Now, I don't think Bernie Sanders actually is popular on 4chan. I think actually Andrew Yang is more popular than Bernie Sanders on 4chan. I am not a frequent visitor to 4chan, so you can let me know down in the comment section if that's an accurate criticism of the Bernie Sanders impression there. And I didn't think the Bernie Sanders impression by Larry David was that good this week. The writing, the comedy wasn't that good. In fact, a little bit later when I get to clip number 6, I'm going to show you the actual Bernie Sanders say something more funny than anything I think the Larry David Bernie Sanders said anywhere in that cold open. Like I said, you can watch the whole cold open at a link down in the video description. And then the robotic Pete Buttigieg claim that you saw from, or satire that you saw from Colin Jost there, I think that is a pretty accurate nailing of some of the problems with Pete Buttigieg, in my personal opinion. In some ways, he reminds me of like Robo Marco Rubio from the 2016 campaign. And I say that, you know, both Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, unless I'm miscounting, both did the full Ginsburg, and that they were on all 5 of the big 5 corporate outlet news shows that I cover. So they both did all 5. That means I watched Pete Buttigieg. You know, all the candidates, they have certain talking points, and you can hear them say sort of the same things over and over again. But Pete Buttigieg, he like is the closest to repeating his answers word for word. Like, I mean, maybe he's just that brilliant that he like remembers the script word for word, but that is a little bit too programmed for my taste, and it's not my only problem with Pete Buttigieg. I'll talk about his answer regarding the marijuana arrests in South Bend, Indiana during the time he was mayor, and that will come up a little bit later. But I want to get to, I have 4 of the 5 corporate outlets having news summaries this week. CBS News' Face the Nation didn't do one. Margaret Brennan, actually, you know, I often will criticize CBS News' Face the Nation as kind of a Fox News light, but Margaret Brennan did some really good journalistic stuff this week. Not only did she make news with the Lindsey Graham clip I'm going to show later, but then in part of the clip I don't show, she really was confrontational with Lindsey Graham about how all this smearing of Joe Biden and Hunter Biden has no basis in any actual investigations that, or any facts that have actually been uncovered. And then, you know, last week I talked about how CBS News' Face the Nation's news summary was about the coronavirus, and maybe that was really the most important news story last week, or maybe it was, you know, a little bit of overreaction. I mean, only time will tell as to how the virus turns out. But this week, CBS News' Face the Nation had an interview with the Chinese ambassador to the United States. At a link down in the video description, you can see the Face the Nation YouTube channel, where I believe they put all the segments up free on YouTube, and that is definitely worth watching, even though I took no clips from it, because Margaret Brennan did a great journalistic job. She asked the Chinese ambassador about this Chinese video blogger who's disappeared. She asked about how they had covered up and even punished this doctor who first broke the news about the coronavirus. And then she even asked him about the Muslim concentration camps in China, where he said, oh, all the people in the concentration camps are happy. And then she didn't really follow up on that. But then in the next segment with, you know, her panel, she said, you know, they're not happy. They're like 1 to 3 million Muslims who are in these concentration camps or re-education camps. So kudos to that. I'm not showing any of those clips, but I just wanted to say kudos to CBS News' Face the Nation and Margaret Brennan for all that content that you can find down at the CBS News Face the Nation YouTube channel. I put a link down in the video description. But now let me get to the actual news summaries that I do have, starting with the longest and most extensive one from NBC News' Meet the Press. All of them, like I said at the beginning, did not really cover the impeachment trial, the State of the Union, the huge ranting tantrum that Trump did from the East Room of the White House the day after the State of the Union. I mean, they talked a little bit on the panels and with some of the guests about the firing of Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman and his twin brother Yevgeny, and Gordon Sondland being recalled as the ambassador to the EU, and that's briefly touched upon, but mostly it's all about the Democrats in Iowa and New Hampshire in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
And a good Sunday morning from Manchester, New Hampshire. We are back again at our Better Than Ever headquarters in New Hampshire, where 2 days from now, voters will either untangle the mess created in Iowa or, more likely, further complicate the Democrats' path to the White House. One thing we did learn this week, Iowa may not be able to count, but it still counts. Pete Buttigieg's strong showing and Joe Biden's fourth-place Iowa finish have sent their candidacies in opposite trajectories. The latest WBZ Boston Globe Suffolk tracking poll out this morning shows Bernie Sanders with just a 2-point lead over Buttigieg, who has surged this week 24-22, with Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, and Amy Klobuchar trailing. Of note, Klobuchar picked up the most overnight. Perhaps she is seeing a bit of a bump from the debate. Since Tuesday, Buttigieg has gained 7 points overall, while Biden has lost 5 overall in that poll. The other thing we learned is that matters could hardly be worse right now for Democrats. The Iowa vote count fiasco is a national embarrassment. The Democratic Party is divided against itself, left versus center left. The candidate once seen as having the best chance of beating President Trump is in a polling free fall and low on money. The party establishment is terrified of a Sanders nomination, but at a loss for how to stop him. And through it all, President Trump was acquitted of impeachment charges. His poll numbers are improving, and he's feeling as confident as ever. So Tuesday's primary may be among the state's most consequential in quite some time, as voters clarify the direction of the Democratic race, or not.
Billionaires by the dozens are contributing to Pete Buttigieg.
The two frontrunners now taking each other on the trail.
You're going to have to take on these people, not take money from them.
We cannot risk dividing Americans' future further, saying that you must either be for a revolution or you must be for the status quo.
And on stage.
In politics, it says it's my way or the highway.
Are you talking about Senator Sanders?
Yes.
I don't have 40 billionaires, Pete, contributing to my campaign.
After a fourth-place finish in Iowa, and now polling fourth in New Hampshire and leaking support.
I took a hit in Iowa, and I'll probably take a hit here.
The Biden campaign announced a limited shakeup on Friday, elevating top aide Anita Dunn to an expanded role. Now, the fire once trained on Biden.
Joe Biden is a friend of mine, and I'm not here to attack him.
Is turning on Buttigieg instead. On Friday night, Buttigieg faced his most direct attacks from opponents eager to challenge him as the leading alternative to Sanders.
We have a newcomer in the White House, and look where it got us.
He's a mayor of a small city.
Senator Warren, is that a substantial answer from Mayor Buttigieg?
No.
On Saturday, the Biden campaign released a digital ad mocking Buttigieg's experience and calling his record into question.
Even when public pressure mounted against him, former Mayor Pete fired the first African-American police chief of South Bend. And then he forced out the African-American fire chief, too.
This guy's not a Barack Obama.
Buttigieg is leaning into his lack of experience.
You don't have decades of experience in the establishment. The city you're the mayor of isn't even the biggest city in the country. It's more like Manchester, New Hampshire. To which I say that is very much the point.
Waiting in the wings, billionaire Mike Bloomberg, who has already spent more than $273 million on ads, dwarfing the field. After Iowa, his campaign says he is doubling his spending.
The president seems to view the Republican Party as a cult that will defend anything he does or says.
I don't think anyone ought to be able to buy their way into a nomination.
And Tom Steyer going negative on the air and raising what may be the real test for both frontrunners after New Hampshire.
Unless you can appeal to the diverse parts of the Democratic Party, including specifically the black community, including specifically Latinos, if you can't do that, then we can't beat Donald Trump.
And joining me now is the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg. Welcome back to Meet the Press.
And like I said, I have multiple clips of Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders, one of Elizabeth Warren, one of Joe Biden coming up. But you can follow along on my clip list if you want to know exactly where those are going to occur. And one thing I'm going to cover in the Bernie Sanders and also the Elizabeth Warren clip that I forgot to mention earlier, I actually got a super chat contribution along the way here. Let me see if I can import this here real quick. Here it is. That's that super chat contribution from Leandro Garcia saying socialism is theft of private property, which... First of all, Bernie Sanders' socialism, democratic socialism, isn't traditional socialism, And I'm actually going to show you a clip a little later of Elizabeth Warren saying that capitalistic markets without rules are theft. And it reminds me of the whole, property is theft from, is it Jean-Jacques Proudhon? Is it Jean-Paul Proudhon? Jean-Jacques Proudhon? I remember John something Proudhon from the Utopian Socialists. Isn't he the one who said property is theft? Maybe someone can Google it and post it in the comments while I play the next clip. And like I said, I have 3 more news summaries. That was the longest and best from NBC News' Meet the Press. I like how they covered the Michael Bloomberg option and also Tom Steyer, because, one thing I've noticed is that isn't shown in any of the clips I'm about to show you. I saw some news later, or I think, did Meet the Press mention there that Tom Steyer is actually polling number 2 in South Carolina, which is goes Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. And then we have March 3rd, Super Tuesday, that's all these southern states and also California, where I am, and I have to decide who I'm going to vote for at that point. But if you look at the results in Iowa and the expected results in New Hampshire, it looks like Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg are the 2 front runners. Maybe that's why they both did the full Ginsburg, all 5 shows based on, I think it was Daniel Ginsburg, Monica Lewinsky's attorney back in the 90s, who did all 5 Sunday shows for the first time. And since then, people call it the full Ginsburg. And but this is my personal opinion. I think Pete Buttigieg might be peaking. I don't think he did that great a job in the ABC News New Hampshire debate that was earlier this week. He got attacked from a lot of places. I especially didn't like his answer about marijuana arrests in South Bend, Indiana, and I'm going to show some clips on that a little later. And that makes me think that maybe the Bloomberg scenario actually is possible, especially if Klobuchar comes up and Buttigieg goes down in the New Hampshire primary, because Klobuchar did better than Buttigieg as the moderate alternative to Bernie Sanders / Elizabeth Warren, and Elizabeth Warren seems to be sinking. And anyway, that's enough analysis between clips. Now I'm going to get to the next news summary, which is actually pretty brief. It's about a minute from ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had, Joe Biden has not done Sunday morning news analysis show interviews. To me, since I do the clips of the Sunday morning news shows every Sunday for the last 355 Sundays, I think it's a sign of weakness of Joe Biden. And of course, he's has a weak showing in the Iowa caucuses. He's not looking to do well in the primary in New Hampshire, and so he finally did a Sunday morning news show. George Stephanopoulos had him on as a guest, and as I've often talked about, when a Sunday morning news analysis show has an exclusive guest, it seems to have a bias on the way they do their news summary at the beginning of the show. And you can see that here, that George Stephanopoulos overly focuses on Biden, who seems to be on his way out as a candidate, but that's pretty much the focus of, or overly the focus of, this 1-minute news summary at the beginning of ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Morning from Manchester. The final days of this New Hampshire primary are always frenetic. Candidates crisscrossing the state, ads saturating the airwaves, new attacks on the stump and across the internet. And as we come on the air this morning, the latest tracking polls show Bernie Sanders in the lead, Pete Buttigieg right behind, with momentum out of Iowa. Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Amy Klobuchar stuck in a second tier. With survival on the line, our debate Friday night was the feistiest of this campaign. The attacks continued all through Saturday, and I sat down with former Vice President Biden right after an emotional speech where he took on his opponents and the president.
I've lost a lot in my lifetime, like many of you have. A car accident took away my wife and daughter. I lost my son, Beau, like many of you have done. But I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and lose my country too, period.
So that was pretty pro-Biden spin on the ABC News This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary this morning. I just saw Third Eye 2020 says it was Pierre Joseph Proudhon. That was I could remember Proudhon, couldn't remember the first name. Pierre Joseph Proudhon said property is theft. Did I get that right? But I want to show you two more news summaries before I get to the newsmaker clips. This next one is actually even shorter. It's the CNN State of the Union news summary, where Jake Tapper always starts off telling us what's the State of the Union, and this week it's wondering if the second time is the charm, because Iowa was such a disaster, which you'll also see Iowa results were pretty much a disaster. That I think we may have seen the end of the Iowa caucuses. That 2020 may be the last time we have caucuses at all, at least in the Democratic Party. But here you'll see Jake Tapper also says what I said earlier about Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg apparently being the front runners now after the Iowa caucuses. And one of the breaking news stories after all these Sunday morning news analysis shows was that Iowa finally announced their preliminary results, unless they're challenged by any of the candidate campaigns. I think they gave it was 14 delegates to Pete Buttigieg and 12 to Sanders, even though Sanders got the most votes at the beginning and most votes at the end. It's this weird thing where the rural counties get more delegates than the urban counties. It's like the Iowa Electoral College, which I don't know why that even is something that's a thing, but you can let me know what you think after we watch this very brief news summary from CNN's State of the Union with Jake Tapper this morning over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is wondering if the second time's the charm. Voters in New Hampshire will now get their chance to shape the Democratic primary race this Tuesday after a disastrous first contest in Iowa where the winner has yet to be officially determined. The two Democratic candidates who have claimed victory in the Iowa caucuses, Senator Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg, will both join me this morning. New this morning, they both appear to be riding some Iowa momentum into the granite state of New Hampshire, where they have increasingly come under attack by their opponents. A new CNN University of New Hampshire poll out this morning shows Sanders and then Buttigieg ahead of the rest of the Democratic field in a state where one of the top two finishers has always gone on to become the Democratic nominee. Joining me now, 2020 presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders. Senator, thanks so much for...
And I will have a Bernie Sanders clip, but you know how at the beginning of the broadcast, my live stream here, I talked about how there were all these news stories that seemed to not make it till Sunday, even though they happened since last Sunday, one of which was the President's State of the Union address. And you would think the CNN show State of the Union would have mentioned something about the State of the Union address in their news summary. I think Jake Tapper did actually mention it later, talking to some of the guests or the panels, but whatever, that seems to be a particularly egregious omission from the news summaries, even though, like I said, that a lot of the the State of the Union, the Senate acquittal of Trump, the Trump East Room rant where he went after his enemies, used profanity for the first time in history in the East Room. Of course, Romney's vote to convict and remove Trump as the first Republican or the first senator ever in U.S. history to vote to convict and remove a president of his own party. All those news stories really didn't end up in the news summaries this week, even though they all happened in the last week. And it just shows how Trump is the chaos president who creates so much noise, so much controversy, so much chaos that you can't even cover it once a week and get it all. Even so many things like fall by the wayside. And speaking of Trump chaos, well, Fox News Sunday is one of the more journalistic of the shows still on Fox, and even so, this is Chris Wallace starts off really emphasizing the embarrassment for the Democrats in Iowa, which, I mean, that is a real news story. You can't blame Fox News for that. And then they actually have Peter Doocy, the son of the blonde-haired guy who is Steve Doocy on Fox and Friends, the longtime Fox and Friends host. Steve Doocy has his son as a reporter on Fox News, which, that puts, why, maybe Fox News should cover the Steve Doocy, Peter Doocy nepotism story and not so much the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden nepotism story. But of course, that's never going to happen. And of course, you'll see from this clip that Peter Doocy, he's a very highly skilled journalist. That's why he was hired by Fox News. Has nothing to do with his last name being Doocy, I'm sure. And if you watched his reports in the past, this report, I mean, it definitely focuses on the negative attacks of Democrats on each other, and the little summary at the end, of course, is a partisan snipe, I think, which I will discuss with you after we watch this final news summary for the 5 corporate outlet. I've shown you 4 of the 5 corporate outlet news summaries because CBS News Face the Nation didn't really do one. But here's the Fox News news summary, kind of similar to the other ones, but with, of course, their own partisan spin that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
And hello again from Fox News. Today in Bedford, New Hampshire, just 2 days before the first in the nation primary. We're live in the Great Hall of the Bedford Village Inn, ahead of the high-stakes race here in the Granite State. A race that's even more important after the vote-counting chaos in Iowa embarrassed the Democratic Party. In a moment, we'll speak with the 2 candidates who are both claiming victory in Iowa, Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Bernie Sanders, both of the new frontrunners, now taking fire from the other contenders in the Democratic race. But first, let's bring in Peter Doocy with the latest from the campaign trail here in New Hampshire. Peter.
Chris, during one of our trips here this summer, the Secretary of State told us that because New Hampshire doesn't have professional sports teams, the primaries are like their pro sports, and people are taking this one very seriously.
This is the decision we will remember for the rest of our lives.
Pete Buttigieg and Bernie Sanders both say they won Iowa.
If you read these articles out, the establishment is beginning to get nervous.
Elizabeth Warren is taking her pitch to people's porches.
Did you get his vote?
Here we go. I'm close.
You're close. What did he need to hear from you?
But I got the woman who came over.
Oh, okay.
Warren and Sanders may have a home field advantage, which has Joe Biden worried about going 0 for 2.
I've always viewed the first 4 encounters, 2 primaries and 2 caucuses, as the starting point.
Biden's latest argument is about labels, warning Sanders is a Democratic socialist and Buttigieg a small-town mayor. Sanders doesn't seem eager to mix it up with Biden, but Buttigieg does.
I do not believe we can take the risk of falling back on the familiar.
And that line has Biden blasting Buttigieg with a serious diss for a Democrat.
This guy's not a Barack Obama.
But Barack Obama and Pete Buttigieg have something in common. They've both beaten Joe Biden in Iowa. Chris?
Peter Doocy reporting from up the road in Concord, New Hampshire. Peter, thank you.
Pete Buttigieg and Barack Obama do have something in common. They've both beaten Joe Biden in Iowa. That's like the little bit of partisan sniping at the end from Peter Doocy after, like I said, accentuating the negatives of the Democrats. And I pretty much pre-criticized that clip. Like I said, there was some news in there. Fox News did actually report some news. They, to some extent, oh, look at that, Dash and Sandy together in the room with me. Maybe I could, try to get a Dash and Sandy clip in the room later, but I have a Dash and Sandy clip for you, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, the Fox News summary there with Chris Wallace and Peter Doocy had some news in it, but there was definitely partisan spin, as I explained before I showed it. Now, the next clip I want to show you was from CNN's State of the Union, Jake Tapper talking to Bernie Sanders, and I promised this earlier that I would have a clip of Bernie Sanders where he said something funnier than anything Larry David said playing Bernie Sanders, using lines, of course, written by the Saturday Night Live writers. I'm not blaming Larry David. Oh, look, it's Dash and Sandy. Let me see if I can get a quick Dash and Sandy clip here while I'm talking to you. Sandy, Dash. Not really. I'm recording the clip here, but I don't know. It's not as good as the Dash and Sandy clip I already have for you. But like I said, this is Bernie Sanders saying something funnier than Larry David as Bernie Sanders, using Saturday Night Live writers said, I think, in the first of the Bernie Sanders. I have multiple Bernie Sanders clips. This is Bernie Sanders responding to something that, believe it or not, Jake Tapper and CNN's crack researchers found that Bernie Sanders said in 1974. That's right, 1974, and Bernie Sanders has a quick response to that over here.
You talk a lot on the campaign trail about income inequality, how the top 1% of Americans possess more wealth than the bottom 90% of Americans all combined.
Yep.
Our investigative K-File team found that early in your political career, way back in 1974, you said that it should be illegal to earn more money than someone could spend in his or her lifetime. You proposed a maximum wage cap on the highest earners.
What year was that?
1970.
What year was that?
It was 45 years ago.
You know, look, Jake, in all due respect, that was 7 years before I was alive. Did you go back to my third grade essay when I was in PS 197 about what I said?
You were a grown
what
man
I said,
in your
40
30s.
or 50. Yeah, but that was 50 years ago. Let's talk about my mayor's record, where I was a transformative mayor, reelected 3 times. You know, we could go back to things that I said in the 70s. I don't think it's productive. I've been a senator for 16 years, a congressman, a senator for 14 years, a congressman for 16 years. But here's the bottom line. This is what I do believe. When you have 3 people who own more wealth than the bottom half of America, when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, when 500,000 Americans are sleeping out on the street, yes, the rich have got to pay, and the large corporations have got to pay their fair share of taxes. We will raise taxes very substantially on billionaires. No apologies for that.
But you do not favor a wage cap as you once proposed. That's the only question.
50 years ago, look, what I just said is when you have massive levels of income and wealth inequality. By the way, in the last 3 years under Trump, the billionaire class has seen an hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars increase in their wealth. The average American worker has seen less than a 1% increase in real wages last year. All right, that's the issue that we got to deal with right now. We need an economy that works for working people, not just for the billionaire class, which is what we have under Trump's economy.
I want to ask you, a nonprofit organization that you launched, Our Revolution.
Now, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Comedy is subjective, but I thought that whole thing about my third grade essay at PS 197, I thought, are you going to ask me about my third grade essay at PS 197, was a funnier answer than anything that Larry David said in the Saturday Night Live cold open last night. And going back to 1974, the wage cap thing, that was a little bit ridiculous, but on the other hand, I did notice, if you watch that clip, Bernie Sanders he kind of dodged the question. He never actually said that he didn't favor a maximum wage, a wage cap, like no one should be able to make above a certain amount. And why didn't he say, no, I don't believe what I said back in 1974? That was kind of interesting that he didn't actually disavow it. He just made a joke about it. But anyway, the next clip I want to show is the runner-up for unintentional political comedy. You know, I have a political comedy clip every week. when there's Saturday Night Live or Real Time with Bill Maher, I take clips from those for actual political comedy, but that was political comedy not from actual comedy writers. And this next clip is what I sometimes call unintentional political comedy. This is, I'm going to show a couple clips where Pete Buttigieg does not do a good job responding to, well, in the debate, the ABC News New Hampshire debate this week, Pete Buttigieg did a really bad job responding to this question from Lindsey Davis that was parodied in the Saturday Night Live clip I showed at the beginning, where he couldn't answer, or in the cold open, he couldn't answer a question about marijuana arrests in South Bend, Indiana, and I'm going to show you a couple clips about that, including this one from Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. Excuse me, but this one I think is a runner-up to the unintentional political comedy category, because a couple times in this clip you'll see Chris Wallace accuse Pete Buttigieg of not being straight. I didn't make that up. Pay attention. At least 2 times in this clip, you will see Chris Wallace totally obliviously accuse Pete Buttigieg. If you look at the Iowa results that have come out since the Sunday morning news analysis shows, you'll see that Pete Buttigieg is the first gay candidate to win the Iowa caucuses, and multiple times in this clip you will see Chris Wallace accuse him of not being straight, but not he just means not being honest, but he says not being straight a couple times in the joke of the Fox News Sunday clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Let's talk about some of the issues that have come out recently. In the debate on Friday night, you were asked about the fact that African Americans in South Bend were 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than whites were. Here was part of that exchange.
How do you explain the increase in black arrests in South Bend under your leadership for marijuana possession?
And again, the overall rate was lower.
No, there was an increase. The year before you were in office, it was lower.
I'm less interested in the statistic than the fact it seemed to me that you weren't straight. That you, at first, you ducked the question, then when she pressed it again, you seemed to deny it. And, you know, you have a reputation as a straight talker. The fact is, blacks were 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana arrests in your town when you were mayor.
No, that disparity is there, and it is there in our city, and it's there across the country. So one of the things I wanted to make sure got across was that that was only part of the story, that in my city, black residents were less likely to be arrested on drug charges than in the state or in the country. But still, the disparity is real. It's a problem, and it's one of the reasons why I'm proposing that we legalize marijuana outright, and when we do, we have a process of expungement and looking backward to the harm that drug policy has caused. Look, we have seen time and time again racial disparities in the enforcement, not just of drug laws, but across the criminal legal system. And we need reform. No one mayor is going to be able to resolve it. This is a national process that I'm pleased to see there's more and more bipartisan energy around doing something about, but it's got to happen now.
Mayor, you not only want to decriminalize marijuana, you want to decriminalize all drug possession.
All drug possession, and you'll hear that in the next answer. Like I said, Pete Buttigieg is, of all the candidates, he is the best at repeating his answers word for word when he goes on 5 different shows like he did this morning. I mentioned that earlier. Both Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg did the full Ginsburg, since they're the 2 front runners post Iowa, and it looks like they're going to be the 2 winners of New Hampshire on Tuesday, unless New Hampshire gives us a surprise, which New Hampshire is wont to do, to give us surprises. So I'm not really predicting for sure that they're going to be the front runners, but they got the preliminary Iowa results that came out since the Sunday morning news analysis shows I've been watching, like the news programs since the ones I took these clips from, and they're saying that the preliminary results, unless there's an appeal from any of the campaigns, say that Pete Buttigieg got 14 delegates and Bernie Sanders got 12 delegates out of Iowa. They both got a bounce, I guess, but like I said earlier, in my opinion, Pete Buttigieg didn't do that great a job at the debate, and maybe he's lost a little and Klobuchar's gaining a little for New Hampshire. That we'll find out on Tuesday, I guess. And Elizabeth Warren, she's from a neighboring state. Maybe she'll rise a little. Who knows? But we'll have to wait and see on Tuesday what the New Hampshire results are. But in terms of Pete Buttigieg, one thing that I thought the Sunday morning news analysis shows did that wasn't that great. They pretty much all of them asked Pete Buttigieg about his bad answer to Lindsey Davis at the ABC News New Hampshire debate about how marijuana arrests went up people of color went up while he was mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And the thing that was so bad about the question from Lindsey Davis, first he didn't acknowledge the facts, and then she followed up and said, yes, but that's not true. The facts actually show the arrest went up. And then he said it was, well, because we were focusing on marijuana arrests to stop gang violence. And I mean, that is a terrible Republican talking point that, if you look over my left shoulder here, you'll see the book, The New Jim Crow from Michelle Alexander. That is like the anchor philosophy that is, that was one of the big epiphanies of the last several years as to what is the huge problem of mass incarceration. It's why I didn't support Kamala Harris, why I'm skeptical of Amy Klobuchar, both as prosecutors, and what Pete Buttigieg said about going after people of color on marijuana charges to fight gangs. That is one of the racist reasons why people of color have higher rates of marijuana arrests. And he did a really bad job of answering the question on the debate stage, but I think talking to Jake Tapper here on CNN's State of the Union, I wish he had said this answer instead of going after gangs, but I wish one of the Sunday morning news analysis shows had mentioned that he did this weird smearing of people of color with the gang thing at the debate, which no one even mentioned that, not even Jake Tapper getting this much better answer that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Lead us to the moment that's got to come next.
I want to follow up on a question from the debate. You were asked by Lindsey Davis about why the marijuana possession arrest rates for black residents of South Bend is more than 4 times higher than the arrest rates for white residents. You admitted that your city was not immune to systemic racism, but I guess the question was, do you personally take responsibility, any responsibility, for that racial disparity in marijuana arrests?
Well, all of us are implicated in these problems, and I take responsibility for everything good, bad, and indifferent that we did in our city. But I also take responsibility for the fact that arrest rates for black residents in my city on drug charges were lower than in the state and around the country. But look, that doesn't get any of us off the hook these systemic disparities and the systemic discrimination that goes on throughout our system are one of the reasons I am calling not only for us to legalize marijuana, but for us to end incarceration as a response to drug possession altogether. Not only that, we've got to look at situations as we go back through the years, all the way back to the crime bill, where incarceration has done so much more harm than the offense that it was intended to deal with. And that means looking at expungements, that means a focus on reentry, and ensuring that people can get back on their feet. Something else we did proactively with measures like ban the box for hiring in the city of South Bend. We've got a long way to go, and if there's one thing I learned as mayor, it's that this entire country needs to come to a reckoning about how the criminal legal system is barely worth the name of justice, especially when it comes to the racial disparities that it's perpetuating.
Last question, just a yes or no. Are you going to win in New Hampshire?
We're in it to win it, and we're planning on a big night.
All right. Former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, thanks so much for your time, sir. Appreciate it.
You know, he can't even answer that last question. Are you going to win in New Hampshire? And actually, I don't think he is going to win in New Hampshire, because I think Bernie Sanders is going to win. And I wish Pete Buttigieg had given that answer about, you know, how drug possession, you know, we here in California where I am, we actually had a ballot measure we passed a couple years back that made all drug possessions misdemeanors, no longer felonies, can't go to prison for drug possession. And that if you watched all of Pete Buttigieg's interviews on the big five corporate outlets, when he went on all five of them this morning, he did kind of say that was what he was in favor of, was decriminalizing all drug possession, turning it all into misdemeanors like we have here in California. And that's all well and good, but I don't know. There's something about Pete Buttigieg that I don't quite buy. I don't think, I don't quite trust. You can, if you're a Pete Buttigieg fan, you can disagree with me down in the comment section. I will read your comments, but now I'm going to show you a few clips that address the whole democratic socialism issue. Someone, you know, I showed a super chat contributor earlier. Leandro Garcia talking about socialism being government theft of private property. Now, if you look up socialism in the dictionary, or if you know about what socialism has meant historically, like I was talking about earlier, socialism is government or collective ownership of the means of production. So, like, for example, maybe Amtrak, where the government owns the trains and the train tracks and employs all the train employees. That's socialism. Where Medicare, where the government pays for seniors to get health care with private doctors using private insurance sometimes, that's not socialism. Even Medicare for all, a single payer system, unless the government owns all the hospitals and employs all the doctors, that's not government ownership of the means of production, not socialism. When Bernie Sanders talks about democratic socialism, he's really talking about mixed capitalism, capitalism with a strong government social safety net, so that the poorest people who are the people who are the losers in capitalism, who capitalism rewards those people who make the most profit, and there are people who aren't all that profitable, at least in terms of capitalism, and they're like the capitalism losers, and you need a social safety net for them. And but that's not socialism. It's not government owner or collective ownership of the means of production. If you look that up in the dictionary, if you know the history of what socialism is from the utopian socialists like Proudhon, who said property is theft, to Marx, the scientific socialist, with going from Hegel with dialectical materialism. And I don't want to go into the whole history of socialism and communism, but I personally think that Bernie Sanders is putting extra weight on his candidacy. I've talked about this many times over the last year or many years, going back to when I voted for Bernie Sanders in the California primary in 2016. I said Democratic socialism is a weight on Bernie Sanders because it's not really socialism. You should call it, it's more social democrats, like the European social democrats, not democratic socialism, because like I said, socialism is government or collective ownership of the means of production, not any of the things that Bernie is talking about. But Bernie actually does have a pretty good political response, and I'm going to show a couple instances of that, and then also a clip from Elizabeth Warren, more showing the view that I believe in. But here's the first Bernie Sanders clip talking to Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press about the problem of democratic socialism. And Chuck Todd actually focuses on the good economic times and how that's a bad time to sell socialism in the clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
Economic and political life of the country.
All right. The other issue that has the Democratic establishment, and you're
Are they nervous? Do you think they're getting nervous?
They get nervous.
Okay.
And there's one word that gets them nervous. It's the word socialism.
Democratic.
I understand the democratic socialism. Do you acknowledge that in an economy that on its surface, and I understand it is not working for everybody, but on its surface looks pretty good to quite a few people. This is a fairly low unemployment rate. Do you acknowledge it's tougher to sell your economic ideas in this perceived good economy?
I don't think so. I think Trump is a fraud. I think under Trump, the top 1% have seen hundreds of billions of dollars increase in their wealth. Do you know what real inflation accounted for increase in wages last year was for the average worker? It was less than 1%.
But it's the first time it had gone up in a while.
17 cents an hour.
Hadn't been going up for over a decade.
It's been not. But how do you talk about an economy that's working when the people on top are making hundreds of billions of dollars more and the average worker is making 17 cents? We need an economy that works for working people. Yeah, and my agenda is that agenda. That's raising the minimum wage. That's health care for all. That's making sure that all of our kids, regardless of their income, can get to college or to trade school by imposing a modest tax on Wall Street speculation.
Somebody that likes their 401k right now but doesn't like the character of Donald Trump, how do you convince them to vote for you?
I convince them to vote for us because we are going to create an economy that works for the middle class.
But they think their economy works well for them.
Well, for some of them, it may.
It's been working well. That's
Chuck,
my point.
Look, here is the reality. Half of the American people today are living paycheck to paycheck. Today, you got 500,000 people sleeping out on the streets when you got 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of America. We're the only country in the world, major country in the world, not to guarantee health care to all people. We got 45 million people struggling with student debt. Please don't tell me that this economy is working well for all people. It is working phenomenally well for Trump's billionaire friends, not for working families.
The reason I bring up the S word, democratic socialism, is because let's just take the swing state of Florida. I grew up in Miami, and I know what they're going to do to you. And they're going to tie socialism to Venezuela. They're going to tie comments you made about Evo Morales in Bolivia.
Yeah, what about Evo Morales?
And they're going to say you will appease socialists in Latin America. You have not condemned them the way others have condemned them, and use that to try to get to wedge people. You know that is what they're going to do.
Well, look, we're dealing with a president who is a pathological liar. So what I'm going to do? He's going to say anything he wants about me,
but
about Joe Biden, about Pete Buttigieg.
You stood behind Evo Morales when it clearly went,
No, I stood with Evo Morales in condemning a coup. I do not like military coups.
He tried to violate his country's constitution.
Well, that's another discussion. I don't know that everybody's interested in Ecuador, but he was overthrown by the military. Not a particularly good president. We got a president of the United States who's cozying up to the autocrat Putin, who says nice things about Kim Jong-un. You know, so you want to talk about cozying up the communists around the world. It ain't me, it is Donald Trump.
Let me ask you a few quotes here from some members of Congress.
And actually, Chuck Todd there, maybe I should have extended that clip because he goes on to talk about a couple of members of Congress who say it's going to be harder to elect a Democratic House and Senate if the top of the ticket is a Democratic Socialist. And I saw a couple news shows mention those congressmen who said that. And one of them was California Congressman Ami Bera, who happens to be my member of Congress. And I don't know. I don't think that's true. Personally, I wish that Bernie Sanders didn't have the Democratic Socialist label. Like I said, I kind of agree more with what Elizabeth Warren says in the clip I'm going to show after next. But I also want to show how Bernie Sanders answers pretty much the same question with Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday. And I mean, his basic answer is pretty good that, you know, you call me a socialist, but Trump is a corporate socialist. He's a socialist for the rich. He took all these tax breaks as a real estate developer. He wants to give all these corporate tax breaks to his rich friends, to big corporations with, you know, that was the big Trump tax cut, mostly went to corporations and the fossil fuel industry and, you know, all the corporate socialism versus democratic socialism. I mean, that actually might be a good political fight for November 2020. And also the Bernie Sanders line about Trump being a pathological liar. That's something that it's nice to see him repeat over and over again, especially on Fox News, even Fox News Sunday. And I will talk about all of that a little more after we watch that final Bernie Sanders clip together tonight over here.
They're not going to effectively represent working families.
Senator, you are, and this picks up right on this conversation, you are getting hit as a democratic socialist, which is how you have identified yourself for decades, by everyone from Joe Biden to Donald Trump. Take a look.
Bernie's labeled himself, not me, a democratic socialist. I think that's the label that the president's going to lay on everyone running with Bernie if he's a nominee.
Well, I think he's a communist. I mean, you know, look, I think of communism when I think of Bernie. Now, you could say socialist, but did he get married in Moscow? And that's wonderful. Moscow's wonderful.
In a general election, I know you laugh.
Look,
I guess you didn't get
Chris, I just want to say something, and it's really sad. It gives me no pleasure to say this. We got a president who is a pathological liar. Who lies all the time. No, I did not get married in Moscow. I participated in creating a sister city program with the city of Yaroslavl when I was mayor of the city. We had Republicans with us, people, city officials. So that's a lie. And obviously, I am not a communist, and I presume the president knows the difference. Maybe he doesn't.
Okay, but here's the question. In a general election where you're going to need the support not just of liberal, progressive, left-wing Democrats, but you're also going to need the support of independents, even conceivably some moderate Republicans, how do you overcome, not the communist label, but the socialist label, which Joe Biden said, not Donald Trump?
Right. That's fair enough, Chris. And I want to make 2 points on that. Number one, in many respects, we are a socialist society today. We have a huge budget, puts money into all areas. Now, Donald Trump, before he was president, as a private business person, he received $800 million in tax breaks and subsidies to build luxury housing in New York. Now, what does that mean when the government gives you $800 million in tax breaks and subsidies? The fossil fuel industry, whose product happens to be destroying our planet right now, receives tens and tens of billions of dollars in tax breaks and subsidies. So does the pharmaceutical industry. The difference between my socialism and Trump's socialism is I believe that government should help working families, not billionaires. So I believe that health care is a human right. I believe we should raise the minimum wage to a living wage of $15 an hour. I believe, in fact, that the rich must start paying their fair share of taxes when you have massive levels of income and wealth inequality.
But Senator, let me ask you about some aspects, specific aspects of your agenda, and you've just laid out some. Let's put up on the screen some of the things that you are proposing. This is a report from CNN. If you add up your proposal for Medicare for all and the Green New Deal and cancellation of all student debt and a guaranteed federal jobs program, all things that you've proposed, that comes to $60 trillion in new spending over 10 years. Senator, the Congressional Budget Office, nonpartisan estimates, projects that over the next 10 years, right now, the federal government will spend a total of $52 trillion in new spending. Would more than double that.
All right, Chris, let me deal with the issues. First of all, we pay for everything that we propose. In terms of health care, the question that Trump and Joe Biden, anybody else has got to answer. If we leave the status quo alone, in the next 10 years, we're going to be spending $50 trillion. We are now spending twice as much per person, $11,000 a year, as do the people of any other country on earth. We're spending a fortune for health care. And yet we have 87 million Americans uninsured or underinsured. 30,000 die each year because they don't get to a doctor. And unbelievably, 500,000 people go bankrupt because of medically related illnesses. They get cancer, they go bankrupt. That's insane. Medicare for all will cost the average, let me finish. Medicare for all will cost the average American less than the $12,000 a year they are paying right now to the insurance companies. You can call it whatever you want, but when you're paying a premium to the insurance companies, I call that a tax. I end those premiums. We end the co-payments.
But Senator, let me get in here. Larry Summers, not.
And actually, if you go down to the link in the video description and you watch the entire Fox News interview with Bernie Sanders, you'll see Chris Wallace there ask Bernie Sanders about something Larry Summers, this sort of right-wing Obama economic advisor, asks, says that Bernie Sanders is too radical, but something goes wrong with the audio in Bernie Sanders' ear in that subsequent clip, and it almost made me wonder, is Fox News Sunday trying to make Bernie Sanders look old, like he can't hear, by making the audio go bad in asking him about Larry Summers? But anyway, that's I didn't want to show too much of the clip for fair use copyright reasons, but I think you saw there in the last two clips that Bernie Sanders, I think, did a pretty good job of trying to mitigate the damage that he does by taking the Democratic Socialist label that I think is a weight on Bernie Sanders' candidacy, even though I voted for him in California in 2016, and I think actually he's the most likely Democratic candidate and the most likely person I'm going to vote for in 2020 here on Super Tuesday, which California is participating in 2020. But for most of the election, I've been leaning towards Elizabeth Warren because I've been kind of worried about this Democratic Socialist label, and I think Elizabeth Warren explained that pretty well, talking to George Stephanopoulos this morning on ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos this morning in the clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together. over here.
Turn that around.
One of the other reasons is, and I was talking to Vice President Biden about this, is the Republicans control the Senate right now. And he was making the case that it's going to be much, much harder for the Democrats to take control of the Senate if there's a Democratic socialist at the top of the ticket. You didn't take the opportunity to take that on Friday night.
So look, I am not. I am a capitalist. I believe in markets. This is what I talk about all the time. There are areas where markets don't work, like in healthcare and in education. But there are a lot of areas where markets do work, and that's what gives us innovation, and that's what creates opportunity, and that's what can grow wealth. But markets need rules. Markets without rules are theft. So it's a big part of what I'm running on. I want to see an America of opportunity, and that means we need a market economy, but it's got to be a market economy that's fair and that everybody gets to play. That means we need a president who's willing to enforce our antitrust laws, which I'm ready to do.
There are a lot of Democrats across the country watched this week. They watched the chaos and confusion in Iowa. They watched President Trump's
So what do you think? I think, like I said earlier, I've been leaning towards Elizabeth Warren, but I think New Hampshire might be her last gasp in terms of the Democratic nomination. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section, but I want to finish up with one more clip. This is the Joe Biden clip talking about last gasps. I don't know if Biden is going to be able to recover from his loss in Iowa, his expected loss in New Hampshire, and he's going to try a comeback in South Carolina, even though it's Bernie Sanders, Tom Steyer in the top two positions, and this is Joe Biden trying to explain why he is the one candidate who can get the black votes, which I don't know if that's true, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section after we watch this penultimate clip before I get to Lindsey Graham breaking news on CBS News' Face the Nation about the conduit of Rudy Giuliani smear campaign to Bill Barr in the Department of Justice. That'll be the final clip after we watch Lindsey Graham talking to Margaret Brennan making news about after we watch Joe Biden talking to George Stephanopoulos in his exclusive interview, talking about how he is the only Democratic candidate who can get the black vote over here.
And we began the interview with those first lines from Friday's debate, where Biden seemed resigned to a loss here in New Hampshire.
I'm just being realistic. I think it's always going to be an uphill fight. When you're running against two people who are neighboring senators, you know the deal. Bernie won here, the neighboring senator, by 20 points last time. So I think it is an uphill fight, but I think it's a fight we'll do well in.
But then you're going to be bucking history, because you know the history here. No one who's come in below second in Iowa, New Hampshire has ever won the nomination.
Well, no one has ever won the nomination without being able to get overwhelming support from the African-American community either. And so far, no one's been doing that but me. Look, the thing that changes this election is everybody in the Democratic Party is united on one thing. You have to beat Donald Trump. In order to do that, everybody knows you've got to bring out the black vote and the brown vote, and you got to be able to do it. I've been able to do that so far, so I don't think it's viewed the same way as it has been in the past.
You've been taking that right to Mayor Pete, and basically been arguing that he's not ready to be president. I did a debate with you back in 2007 where you said another candidate wasn't ready to be president. It was Barack Obama. You were asked, is he ready? You said, I think he can be ready, but right now I don't believe he is. The presidency is not something that lends itself to on-the-job training.
I think that I stand by the statement.
Well, let's get something straight here. I didn't attack Pete. Pete's been attacking me. He's been saying that the reason we're in the problem we're in now is because of the recent past. That's 8 years of Obama and me. I don't get that. I don't understand that. And I think he has completely misunderstood or misrepresented my record. I've done a great deal. I've gotten an awful lot done, both as a senator and as vice president. And he talks about him being ready. Well, I managed a $900 billion recovery act with no waste or fraud in it. We bailed out his city. I led the fight. The president turned to me and said, get Detroit out of its mess. I know how to handle a city. I was able to get Detroit back on its feet. That's why the mayor of Detroit endorsed me. I've been able to get the chemical weapons treaty passed. I was responsible in large part for the what happened in Paris with John Kerry and so on. So I don't understand how those things don't matter. And I don't understand when they talk about the past why Barack was such a lousy president. I thought he was a pretty damn good president.
But why
that's the
is
implication.
nominating Pete Buttigieg a risk?
Well, because Pete Buttigieg has been nothing more, and he's a good guy. I like him. And he's a smart guy. But he's been the mayor of a city smaller than the city we're in now. And so what has he done? Who has he pulled together? Does he know any of the foreign leaders? Has he been able to? I mean, Barack Obama was a different story. Barack Obama came from a large state. He was a United States senator. He had run before. He'd been involved in international. He had a clear vision of what he thought the world should look like, and so on. So, but it's a very different situation.
So, what do you think? Is that the last gasp of the Joe Biden attempt to win the Democratic nomination? He lost Iowa. He's going to lose New Hampshire. It looks like he's going to lose South Carolina and Nevada. I mean, where is Joe Biden going to go? I think his quest to become I actually kind of liked Joe Biden back in 1988 before he had to drop out because he plagiarized a speech from UK Labour leader Neil Kinnock. I was actually back at I was an undergraduate at Yale University at that time, and I was involved in the Yale Students for Heart group at that time. I don't want to even talk about what happened with Gary Hart, but I can't believe that Gary Hart had to drop out in '84 and lost. Wasn't even a factor in '88 because he had an affair with Donna Rice, but now we have a president who, says that when you're a star, you can grab them by the pussy because, well, whatever. I don't even want to go into all of that, but I do have one more clip to show you on. This is Lindsey Graham talking to Margaret Brennan on CBS News' Face the Nation. I think trying to pivot away from the whole Hunter Biden is going to sink the Joe Biden Democratic campaign because, like I just showed in that last clip, I don't think Joe Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee. But apparently Lindsey Graham this morning, Sunday morning, talked to both Trump's Attorney General Bill Barr and the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and both of them said, if you get any information from the Ukraine, it's probably Russian intelligence disinformation, and you should be very wary. And we're not even gonna, he is not even gonna look into anything from the Ukraine about Hunter Biden. That's all suspect now. In the final news clip I will talk about with you after we watch it together over here.
He's watching, apparently, because he sent out a tweet this morning about you appearing on this program. He said, deface the nation, will tell Lindsey Graham they must start at the judiciary and not stop. I'm not exactly sure quite what that means, but it sounds like he's giving you marching orders.
I think what he's talking about is oversight of the FISA warrant system that failed. I can promise the president and your viewers that I'm going to call witnesses about
foreign surveillance.
Yeah, the Horowitz report. You know, McCabe, Comey, Rosenstein, Yates. How did you miss it so badly? How could you issue 4 warrants against an American citizen based on information that was unreliable? But here's what I want to tell the president. I'm not going to be the Republican Christopher Steele. So Rudy Giuliani last night said he's got the goods on Hunter Biden. I called the Attorney General this morning and Richard Burr, the chairman of the Intel Committee, and they told me take very cautiously anything coming out of the Ukraine against anybody. So what I will do is I will get to the bottom of how the FISA warrant system failed and make sure we reform it. It doesn't happen again. I think questions about the conflict of interest regarding Hunter Biden and the Ukraine need to be asked. The State Department had warnings and they ignored the conflict of interest. The whistleblower episode needs to be investigated by Richard Burr. But if Rudy Giuliani has any information coming out of the Ukraine, he needs to turn it over to the Department of Justice because it could be Russian propaganda.
Last time you were on this program, though, in December, you said Giuliani should come to the Judiciary Committee with what he said was a suitcase full of documents he picked up in Ukraine on the Bidens. Are you saying you don't want any part of this anymore?
After talking to the Attorney General and the Intelligence Chairman, that any documents coming out of the Ukraine against any American, Republican or Democrat, need to be looked at by the intelligence services who has expertise. I don't, because Russia is playing us all like a fiddle, and Christopher Steele was played by the Russians. That started the Russian investigation against President Trump. It was all garbage.
Are you saying
I don't want to do the same thing?
Rudy Giuliani is getting played by the Russians?
I don't know. I'm saying that the attorney...
Well, it sounds like that's what you're suggesting.
I'm saying that anybody who's got any information coming from the Ukraine needs to turn it over to the intelligence community. As to Senator Schumer wanting Parnas in the audience, if you don't understand that
this is
Parnas,
one of Rudy Giuliani's business associates.
Crooked as a snake, facing indictment. So Schiff gets called by a Russian hoaxer. I've got photos of President Trump in a compromised situation. To every American politician, you should be very cautious about receiving information coming out of the Ukraine and other countries that may be backed by Russian misinformation.
Does the president know that?
I hope so.
Apparently,
well, if he's watching the show, here's what I would tell the president. I'm going to get to the bottom of the FISA warrant process because it was an abuse of power of the Department of Justice, the FBI, and we're going to make sure that Hunter Biden's conflict of interest is explored because it's legitimate. How could Joe Biden really fight corruption when his son's sitting on the Burisma board?
But can you clarify? You said you talked to Attorney General Barr
this morning.
This morning. Has the Department of Justice been ordered to investigate the Bidens?
No, the Department of Justice is receiving information coming out of the Ukraine from Rudy.
Already?
To see, he told me that they have created a process that Rudy could give information and they would see if it's verified. Rudy Giuliani is a well-known man. He's a crime fighter. He's loyal to the president. He's a good lawyer. But what I'm trying to say to the president and anybody else, that the Russians are still up to it. Deterrence is not working. So let's look at Hunter Biden's conflict. Let's look at Joe Biden. Vice President Biden, what did you do when they told you your son was on Burisma's board? It undercut your ability to fight corruption. Did you take it seriously? Obviously he didn't. But when it comes to documents coming out of the Ukraine to Republicans and Democrats, be very cautious. Turn anything you got over to the intel community.
Have you ever said to the president when he repeats things like...
So that was the final news clip, and I think you saw Lindsey Graham there set the parameters of what's going to happen for the next several months till the November election, where the conflict of interest is still going to be a talking point, but any sort of legal investigations, we're going to have Rudy Giuliani give all of his information to Bill Barr at the Department of Justice and Richard Burr, the Republican senator in charge of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and they're going to vet any of the crazy information coming from Rudy so it doesn't become too crazy for the 2020 November election. They're going to try to smear Joe Biden if he's the nominee, which becomes increasingly unlikely if you've been watching my previous clips. And anyway, that's the final news clip I want to show you. I think I've pretty much shown you the state of the Democratic race. I've made some commentary on the state of the Republicans post-impeachment, the impeachment acquittal, which I hope is going to tie every Republican member of the Senate to the idea that Trump should be acquitted despite his obvious abuse of power to coerce the president of the Ukraine into investigating his political rival Joe Biden, who apparently is going to now fade away in the Democratic primary that I've mostly been covering this week. And before I finish the show, first I want to thank all of the Super Chat contributors, including, I showed one Super Chat, Leandro Garcia question. Here's several more here. Thank you all for those Super Chat contributions. I think I did address the whole socialism question there, and thank you also to Lulu Girl, to Natas Crawd there, and Hair Randog for all those questions about socialism and the Republicans and Bernie Sanders. And before I finish up, I want to show you the Dash and Sandy clip, possibly with a shocking ending. As usual, I try to get some Dash and Sandy clips around the food and water bowl where they interact, and there's sort of a shocking ending here where, I don't know, hashtag Me Too with what Sandy does to Dash, the dandy clip, as it were, over here, that I will talk about with you a little more. And then I will have a bonus Dash and Sandy clip that I shot while I was talking to you after we watched this first Dash and Sandy clip together over here. So that clip was not only upside down, but it also had some butt sniffing, I have to say, from Sandy. Sandy was doing some Dash butt sniffing, which I am embarrassed to show, but it sometimes happens. But I can't end the show with that clip, so earlier, while I was talking to you, I actually filmed a Dash and Sandy clip that I will end the show with over here. Not really. I'm recording the clip here, but so there was very little action in that clip, but it took place right over there to my left, where Sandy and Dash are often hanging out while I'm doing my broadcast. That's the final clip, the final Dash and Sandy clip. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you. Well, who knows what's going to happen this week. Maybe I will have some reason to upload some edited, produced video or do some other video. But if I don't do that, I guess I will be seeing all of you next week on my Sunday live clip roundup, like I've been doing every week for the last 355 weeks. And I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet until next week, or whatever happens during the week. But that's it for this week. And I hear the Sandy whining there to my left as I finish the show. Thank you for joining me. Until next week, this is LiberalViewer signing off. Thanks for joining me. Good night. See you all around the internet.